There's a new video going around made by this guy right here, CJ Werleman, which claims that I'm an intelligence asset. And unlike the New York Post article from earlier this week, which claimed I was a Russian, Lebanese, Iranian, Yemeni, Pakistani intelligence asset, he claims that I am an asset of the CIA and Mossad.
Jackson Hinkle, whom many believe to be a covert asset for the United States government.
Now, what I find very curious about this CJ Werleman figure is his opinions about the axes of resistance, those who are actually fighting against Israel. For starters, CJ has some interesting views about the resistance in Lebanon, formerly led by Zionist-Jolani. He says that the world will be a much better place when Israel and the Lebanese resistance wipe each other off the face of the earth. He accuses the Lebanese resistance of being the largest narcotics trafficker in the world, and he also accused the Lebanese resistance of ethnic cleansing. CJ has also tweeted out that the resistance in Yemen, Ansar Allah, is a racist theist group that is guilty of ethnic cleansing and genocide. He said his wish for 2025 is for the malignant cancer of Ansar Allah to be wiped off the face of the earth. And he says that he hopes that Israel and Ansar Allah both wipe each other out on multiple occasions, because he said that the Red Sea blockade that Yemen is actually mobilizing is the same exact tactics that Israel is using against Palestinians. And as for his views on Iran, he says the same thing. You know, they're a theist country, they're committing ethnic cleansing, genocide, all these sorts of things. However, there is one Arab leader that Mr. CJ Werleman sure does love, and that is the NATO finance armed and backed leader in Syria now, Mr. al-Jolani, who just over the past few weeks has decided that will normalize relations with Israel in the near future when his country stabilizes. He said, we don't want any war with Israel when Israel decided to occupy a good swath of the new country. He announced that he's going to privatize Syria's assets and sell them off to foreign parasites. He also announced that they're going to outlaw Palestinian resistance factions inside of Syria. They started that off by arresting the leaders of the PFLP and the PIJ in Syria just a few weeks ago. But enough about CJ. Let's get into what he actually says about me. So he starts off this video by trying to tie me to Tulsi Gabbard, who's the current director of national intelligence and previously was a congresswoman from the Democratic Party who ran for president of the United States within the Democratic primary process.
You see, Tulsi Gabbard and Jackson Hinkle are more than close friends. They are colleagues in the United States government's mind war against America's foes and friends.
I met with Tulsi Gabbard 3 times, and I found her to be a nice enough person. She first came to my hometown on her presidential campaign and visited a decommissioned nuclear power plant, which we discussed, and we discussed nuclear legislation. The second time we met was in San Francisco on, I think, her second to last stop on her presidential campaign. And at that event, after she spoke, I got to sit down with her for about 10 minutes and ask her some questions. The third time I met her was at a pro-peace event saying that we need to end the Ukraine proxy war in Washington, D.C. We just both happened to be speakers at the event. And it is true. I agree with a lot of her political views, and I found her to be like the only congresswoman and presidential candidate that was speaking out on these issues. Whether it was agreements about, nuclear power plants, whether it was ending U.S. regime change wars in Syria, for example, whether it was about pardoning and freeing Julian Assange and Edward Snowden. I agreed with her on other things, like when the Trump administration actually took office in his first term, she and Tucker Carlson successfully convinced Donald Trump to not go to war with Iran. I think that's a good thing, and she did it again as director of national intelligence. All great things that I support. Do I disagree with her on some stuff? Of course, and I've been very clear about that. But according to CJ Werleman, this means that I'm somehow an agent of the U.S. government. And because I met her when I was like 18 or something, or 19, I was just out of high school, that this somehow means that I'm like an agent. I don't know. I don't even know where to begin with this one. Now, also in this video, he claims that I've never talked about Palestine or mentioned Palestine since before October 7th of 2023. That's just patently false.
Hinkle never once mentioned Palestine in public prior to October 7th, 2023.
I have covered Palestine and Gaza and the West Bank on my YouTube show many times before October 7, 2023. Unfortunately, my YouTube is banned. All my videos were deleted, so you can't see any of that. I can show you some old tweets from when I first started my Twitter account, going back to like 2020, 2019. Maybe you can see them below. I'll put them in here, where I am talking about my YouTube videos that I was uploading, where I was talking about Gaza. I attended pro-Palestine protests in like 2019, 2020 in Los Angeles. I tweeted about the subject regularly. I had guests on like Max Blumenthal to talk about Gaza, Dan Cohen to talk about Gaza when my YouTube show was very, very small. He claims to be a journalist, this CJ Werleman, but he's really not doing his journalistic due diligence, and he's putting out false information here. Later on in the video, he claims that I praised Netanyahu at one point, which really doesn't make sense. If you see that I was going to pro-Palestine protests and talking about Palestine in 2019, 2020, 2021, why would I magically start saying that I love Netanyahu? What I actually said, and he clipped it out of context, was the same thing that Zionist-Jolani said, which is that Benjamin Netanyahu is so crazy, so deranged, that his actions, Netanyahu's actions, will bring about the demise of the Zionist entity and will help establish a Palestinian state. Of course, there will be great suffering, whether Benjamin Netanyahu or someone else is in charge. It doesn't matter. I also discussed this with one of the Politburo members from the Palestinian resistance when I was in Qatar, Dr. Bassem Naim. We had the same discussion. But the truth is, we are closer now than ever before to getting a Palestinian state recognized by the UK, by France, by Canada, by all these Western nations because Netanyahu is so deranged. So I say Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah was correct, and I was correct when I repeated that statement. It was not a condoning of Netanyahu or saying I support his actions. Complete fabrication, clipping it all out of context. And lastly, this is the most absurd one. CJ Werleman claims that I went to Lebanon. I went to attend the funeral of Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah. I went to Yemen and I met with a bunch of resistance factions there. And somehow I was able and allowed to go back in and out of the United States without any problems.
Suspicions were raised when Hinkle attended the funeral of slain Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah on the 25th of February. These suspicions reached a new level barely a week later when he turned up in Yemen as a guest of the Houthi militias to give a speech on their behalf. But somehow, Jackson Hinkle is able to skip freely in and out of the United States and from China.
Complete fabrication, complete lie. I have not been to the United States in about 10 or 11 months, I think. I've been in Russia this whole time. I live in Russia. I have not been to the United States. I miss my family dearly, but I've been here as a result of the threat of something happening to me if I were to go back to the United States. So nothing but lies here from CJ Werleman. Do better. And also stop supporting these Zionist, CIA-backed, propped-up leaders like Jolani, and instead understand why you, as someone who claims to support Palestine, should support the axes of resistance rather than smear them.